Welcome to the Age of Reason, where we'll be discussing transhumanism with an all-star panel of subject matter experts. Now, with me tonight, I have Rowan Horn, I have the creator of the Prometheus Project, and I have the amazing, the phenomenal, the powerhouse himself, Dr. Aubrey DeGray. So, let's break into this and get the introductions of our guests out of the way, and then hand it over to my co-host and let them say their spiel. So, Dr. Aubrey DeGray, it's a pleasure to have you on tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Is there anything that you want to say in your introduction of who you actually
are? I can tell everybody who I am. I am a biomedical gerontologist. I'm the Chief Science Officer of Sense Research Foundation, which is a biomedical research charity based in California. And we work on the defeat of aging. We work specifically on the development of new therapies, which will be much more effective than anything that exists today in not only stopping the gradual physiological decline that we all experience in old age, but actually reversing it, genuinely rejuvenating people and allowing them to remain in a physical and mental state that is fully functional like a young adult, however long they live.
Well, Dr. Aubrey DeGray, it's a pleasure to have you on tonight. Thank you for being here. Now, Rowan Horn, it's a pleasure to have you on, too. You've been a recurring guest in this 5-part series. It's sad to see this series end tonight, but, so, who are you, and what will you be discussing tonight, my friend?
Well, I'm the founder of the Eternal Life Fan Club. What I do is I promote the idea of indefinite life extension. I'm a huge supporter of Dr. Aubrey DeGray and his Sense Foundation, and I'm trying to rally people, give them hope that death isn't inevitable. If we can cure aging, we don't have to die. Potentially, we could live forever indefinitely. And so I just want to promote that as much as I can and inspire people, give people hope, and give them encouragement. And yeah, that's what I do.
Well, Rowan, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for being here. Now, this is somebody's name that is a phenomenon in the transhumanist movement itself. I don't want to butcher his name, so welcome, Cyrus. It's a pleasure to have you on. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for inviting me. Just want to say it's an honor to be here with you, Mr. DeGray. I've been following your work for many years. I'm very honored to be here and look forward to hear what you have to say tonight. My name is Kurosh. My background is mostly in the biological sciences. I did my undergrad in molecular genetics, and in grad school I did neuroscience, in dentistry now of all things. But I guess the reason I'm here is Mike invited me because I'm the founder of Project Prometheus. Project Prometheus is a Bay Area transhumanist meetup group with a very specific focus, which I can explain later if you have. Basically, we follow 3 main tracks of inquiry. We want to work on personal enhancements, species enhancements, and sociocultural and spiritual enhancements. And I can get into those and what those mean exactly if we have time, for sure. Once again, thank you.
Well, Kurosh, it's a pleasure to have you here. I hope I didn't butcher your name.
You did perfectly.
Thank you, Kurosh. So, since we've gotten the guest introductions out of the way, let's move on to the amazing wingmen and wingwomen of the Age of Reason team. So, Randy, it's a pleasure to have you here tonight. How are you doing, bud?
Doing pretty good tonight. Very, very excited about this particular conversation. I'm happy to have Cyrus and Aubrey here. It's an honor to really speak with both of you. And it's always great to speak with Rowan. I'm very glad to have him with us again tonight. So, looking forward to it.
So am I. I have to say that this is, of the 5-part series, this is the conversation that I've been looking forward to the most. Now, we do have one other co-host to introduce, Aubrey Rose.
Hello.
Hello. How are you doing tonight?
I am wonderful.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Is there anything you want to say before we break into the topic at hand, which is transhumanism?
I am very excited to be on my second show of The Age of Reason, and I'm very, very thrilled to be here with such distinguished guests, and I'm happy to hear what you all have to say and to learn something new.
Well, with that being said, we can all agree here that the person that would be the master of this topic at hand would be Dr. Aubrey de Grey. So, Dr. Aubrey de Grey, what are your thoughts on how to increase human longevity indefinitely?
Okay, how long do you want me to speak for?
I've got the next week free if you would like to just go on. I mean, we can only do it for 8 hours, so.
Indeed. All right. Well, okay. Obviously, I don't want to duplicate too thoroughly things that anyone can find out online. I think really what I want to try to explain is the motivation for what Sense Research Foundation does in the context of this this show. In other words, in the context of transhumanist thought. I've actually had a somewhat of a love-hate relationship with the whole transhumanist concept. Around 10 years ago, I was actually the first recipient of the World Transhumanist Association's award, the H.G. Wells Award for, I think it's called something like Outstanding Contributions to Transhumanism. But in a way, it's a little bit embarrassing because I don't really think of myself as a transhumanist at all. In fact, when I was in Paris about 10 days ago giving a talk, I talked about how it may actually be that even having a word like transhumanism to describe the collection of things that are normally described under that rubric may be actually counterproductive. It may be a bad thing. Because I think it tends to scare people. It tends to make people think that what we are working on is somehow a big departure from what they're already comfortable with, the kinds of research that people do that are considered normal. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that whether it be in biogerontology, working on the postponement of human aging, or whether it be in artificial intelligence or nanotechnology or whatever, these things are actually not really departures, certainly not in terms of their motivation. They are a natural continuation of what people have been doing in technology and pioneering technology since the dawn of civilization, and certainly in the past few hundred years. So I feel that people would actually be more willing to embrace what we do, which would of course be a very good thing because it would help to attract funding and to get this work done more quickly, if we were less scary. And I feel that the word transhumanism in and of itself actually holds us back in that way. What I'm interested in particular is I'm interested in keeping people healthy. And I find that it's necessary, it rather annoys me that it is necessary, but I find that it's constantly necessary to remind people that that's what I work on, because people are very, very inclined instead to focus on what I think of as a side effect of keeping people healthy, namely keeping people alive. After all, being sick is the main risk factor for dying, right? So if you keep people healthy, you are in general going to be quite likely to keep people alive for a lot longer. And the thing is, if one actually focuses on the keeping people alive part as the main theme, then people get the wrong impression. They start to go down rabbit holes of thinking along the lines of keeping people alive in a bad state of health. A state of health that is reminiscent of today's way of thinking of people who were born a long time ago. And of course, that's the exact opposite of what this is actually about. So, I've become more and more aggressive over the years in telling people, no, dummy, it is all about health, and any longevity benefits, however desirable they may be, are a side benefit. And so what you have to tell me if you are in some way criticizing this, which of course a lot of people do, is you have to tell me that medicine for people who were born a long time ago is a bad idea. And people, of course, are rather hesitant to say that. So I think that perhaps puts my work and Sense Research Foundation's work in the right context for this show.
Some of the questions that you mentioned earlier, Albany, seems kind of appropriate here. Let's talk about the furthering life extension in general. You had some
Absolutely.
questions about the research there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my questions was, do you believe regenerative medicine will help prolong symptoms of diseases such as Huntington's, heart disease, Alzheimer's, just with, as we graduate into finding out how to prolong the human race and a human life?
I'm perfectly sure that regenerative medicine will remove those symptoms. The whole point of regenerative medicine for the health problems of aging is that it is a rejuvenation technology. In other words, that it repairs the physical damage that we have, the molecular and cellular damage that accumulates throughout life. Of course, in some cases at an accelerated rate, in a situation like Huntington's, for example, but it happens to everybody at some rate. And if we can repair that damage, then we will restore mental and physical function and restore people to the performance that they had as young adults. So it's definitely not a case of perpetuating the symptoms that people have in old age.
Thank you. I did have one other question, if you guys don't mind me asking.
Go ahead.
Even without immediate regenerative medicine, do you see the lifespan of the average human still increasing, even with simple increase in vaccinations, 3D printing, clean living?
Not very much, no. I think, well, 3D printing, of course, is, for printing of organs, is very much part of regenerative medicine. So let's exclude that from your question. But with technologies that are already around today in the clinic, whether it's vaccination or better hygiene or better diets or better supplements or whatever, no, I think that we are reaching diminishing returns there. There's been a very clear reaching of diminishing returns around the middle of the 20th century with regard to the extension of life by the methods that began in the 19th century, namely better hygiene and the simple medicines that we developed like antibiotics and vaccines and so on. Hardly anyone dies of infections early in life anymore in the Western world, so we can't gain much from that anymore. The same thing is now happening for what you might call the second epoch of life extension, the epoch that has been driven by greater prosperity, greater nutrition, especially early life nutrition, reduction in smoking, and so on. We're still making advances in that, but the advances are undoubtedly slowing down. And there are big wake-up calls happening in the statistics that we've been able to see over the past few years. Possibly the most striking statistic of all is that, for me anyway, is that maybe last year, I think it was, the US Census Bureau, or some demographic body in the US, announced that the number of centenarians in the US was less than half of what had been predicted only 10 years previously. That's how fast things are slowing down at the tail end of the curve. So I think that actually, no, I think we are really seeing a hard wall of longevity around the age of 115, 117, that will not be exceeded even at the very maximum, and probably in terms of average longevity no more than 100, until we develop the kinds of regenerative medicine, rejuvenation biotechnologies that Sense Research Foundation is working on. Once those come along, the sky's the limit, but until they come along, we've really got a hard wall we're hitting now.
Yeah, it's interesting you put it that way. You've changed my mind on it a little bit. Before we started broadcasting, I mentioned that these medicines we have now might be incrementally increasing lifespan, but I had not considered the wall, as you put it there, that there's really kind of a limit to how far any of that stuff can go. And like I said, just changed my way of thinking a little bit on that.
To sort of jump in there, though, let's actually try to get the rest of the panel involved, because not that I don't enjoy Dr. Gray's answers, but we do have two other knowledgeable guests on this topic too, so let's stretch it over to them. Rowan, do you have anything that you've heard so far that you want to weigh in on?
Yeah, let's talk about the wall. So the wall is what I'm afraid of, and that's why I'm so concerned and trying to get as much funding for SENS Foundation as possible, basically, because I see SENS Foundation as being the most promising organization now that's trying to cure aging. And so, like, transhumanism to me is basically like an opportunity for salvation, right? For the atheist, transhumanism is that thing that could save us if we're living in an indifferent universe that doesn't care about our survival and we're getting old. It's basically that idea, and so it's kind of a fringe thing. I could see Aubrey Gray's point that it can make people scared of the topic, but in another way, it can actually be very, I think, inspirational for a segment of the world that they could really, like atheists. I feel like atheists should totally be like totally excited about transhumanism, and that's part of what I'm trying to do is because, like, if we're atheists and we're all getting old and dying, like what's our hope? It's transhumanism. You know, it's the idea of technology and SENS Foundation and things like this that can actually make us so we don't have to die, you know? And so that's basically my thoughts so far.
Can I weigh in or something?
Yes, you can.
I just want to pick up on something Dr. DeGray said about and Rowan mentioned about the word transhumanism. I myself was very ambivalent about this term for a long time, just because there are a lot of loaded value systems attached to it right now that I tend to disagree with. Like at Project Prometheus, one of the reasons I started it was because I saw this severe problem in the transhumanist community, in the sense that I found that there's a lot of focus on the individual. There's a big, strong libertarian wing among us, and just found there's a lot of disjointed efforts like life extension. I mean, this is all great, but I wanted to take like a much more wider view of this. And for me, there's very little talk that I saw in transhumanist circles about the general human condition, alleviating human suffering, and it's all too much. I found that it's focused to be on our individual selves as opposed to alleviating the general human suffering. So with Project Prometheus, I started it as to be kind of something different. Our focus is not so much on just the individual, because there are plenty of organizations that do that. For me, if transhumanism is to be successful, we have to ground all these technologies. I mean, life extension is just one of them. We have to ground them in some sort of ethical and spiritual, cultural framework that makes it more palatable to the general population. And so it puts it in context, because without it, when we talk about life extension, for example, for me, what is the value of a human life? If you were to live for 1,000 years, is that life worth more than somebody who lives a shorter life or a high-quality life? So the focus for me is, when I look at the world and the problems I see with it and all the different, political, economic systems that are not working, it goes back to the individual human being. And I believe we have to go back to square one. And if you're going to build a better world, which is what Project Prometheus is all about, like we want that whole Star Trek kind of a world, we have to start and say, there's a severe problem with the human condition itself, and to work, and part of what we are proposing really is a human modification, genetic modification program to enhance humanity itself and to remove a lot of the character flaws that we have among us. And so for me, in terms of moving forward, I rather focus on curing our flaws first and then working on immortality and all that, because just we're overpopulated as it is, a world with more people, but the same problem. We're just increasing the problems in the world. So I just want to add that thought in there, and in the sense that I think transhumanism, yes, the term is kind of scary to people, but I think if it's redefined in this context, it can be both an ideal to strive towards and something that can be acceptable to the general population. So,
As a follow-up question to that, though, Cyrus, do you actually
yeah.
think that an elixir of life or something along those lines is a feasible solution to increasing longevity indefinitely?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't catch up.
Do you think that an elixir of life is a feasible goal for the medical community for the foreseeable future?
I think, well, yes, of course. I mean, who wouldn't want to live longer? I mean, it's a great goal to work towards. But I think we're missing the boat. Like, if you consider it from a bigger angle of our species, I mean, there are obviously we need people like Dr. Gray to work on this. But for me, like, I don't believe that should be the priority of us as a species. We have a lot of problems, and I think we need to focus on fixing our problems and putting resources towards those issues, which I think if we work on human enhancement, genetic modification programs, and it's just the way I see it is a human being, basically our genes with very modest change. It hasn't really changed in 50 to 100,000 years. We're basically very maladapted to the current modern environment. We are basically cavemen in the modern world, and I think it's time that we consider seriously, and I mean, human genetic modification, life extension is part of that. I'm sure Dr. DeGray can talk about, how genes are involved in all this. But I think if we work back to the basic, unique, the foundation block for all political systems, all social systems is the unitary human being, and work from there, it will produce far more rewards down the road. I just find it. Go ahead, Dr. DeGray.
Yeah, could I come in on that a little bit? So, I mean, I like what Kourosh is saying in many ways. It's just a question of the audience. When I say that I like to kind of downplay the transhumanist angle, if you like, the disparity, the separation between our vision, the vision of the people on the show, and most people's vision. The reason I do that is not because I don't have that vision. It's because I think that we are likely to achieve that vision more effectively and more rapidly if we take more people with us. And I see that historically it's been a really tough sell to try to get people to to go back to square one, as you were putting it, and redefine what they feel the human condition is about and how to fix it. I think it's easier to try to be more incremental, try to work from what people actually already are comfortable with, and emphasize how we are really only continuing that same goal. So, this is the business about life extension versus health extension. If you talk about making people healthier, nobody complains. Everybody's on your side. If you talk about life extension, somehow it doesn't sound like medicine anymore. And when it doesn't sound like medicine anymore, people have to start from square one. They have to decide whether they think what you're saying is a good idea. If you're only talking about medicine, they don't need to decide because they already have decided.
I guess what I was trying to say is like I recently have done some articles and posts about this issue in the transhumanist community, and it's received quite a bit of feedback. And the issue is this: like I find, like as I was saying, transhumanism, it just seems to be very disjointed. Like there are a lot of people focusing on one particular technology or the other, as opposed to taking a holistic viewpoint, collective societal viewpoint of this issue. I mean, in this sense, I mean, I'd like to hear what Rowan has to say, but I know the issue about death. I know he's mentioned many times that death for me is not the end of all. I've heard a lot of people in transhumanist circles saying, somebody dies, that means the life has no value. I just disagree with this kind of value system. I don't think a human's life is determined by how long they live necessarily, but in terms of what they do and how they serve others. And so in this sense, I guess there's a little bit of disagreement.
Yeah, I could give a comment on that. So I guess I'm trying to promote the view of life from a self-interested perspective of the individual. Okay, and as individuals, when we die, our meaning is over at that point. At the point of death, if there's no afterlife, which none of us know that there is, it's over. And so, from the perspective of the individual, we need to value that as well. You can't just look at the world in terms of society and the world. Like if you die and you leave a legacy, right? Other people are gonna benefit from that. But from your perspective, it sucks because you don't get to have any more fun. You don't get to have a life anymore. Your legacy isn't benefiting you because you're dead. So I guess I try to promote the idea of we should value our own interest as individuals. It's not just a society here. We're people. We're each in an individual body. So we should care about that we should care about our own life, like more than anything. I think our existence.
I got a good question here that's related to this. I'm not sure if you guys have read Zoltan Istvan, but his first law of the transhumanist wager, transhumanists must safeguard one's own existence above all else. I think that's kind of the idea you're talking about there, right?
I have a lot
some
to say
aspects.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've actually written an article criticizing those 3 laws. I love Zoltan. I love his books. It influenced me greatly. But I mean, those 3 laws, like if you think about it, if those 3 laws were implemented in society, what kind of impact it would have? Just imagine if you had your own daughter there. I mean, in a house that's burning down, would you not save your daughter, like because you want to preserve your own life? What kind of?
That's actually the question I posed to him when we had him.
Imagine if our police officers, if our military, if they were not to sacrifice themselves for for us, where would we be? We'll have to basically sleep with a gun under your pillow every night, right? So these kind of value systems only work if you're basically freeloading of others who don't have this value system. Because on a societal level, to promote these kind of values is to bring back, paradoxically, it's going to bring more death and chaos. And if you were just to value your own life. So on this sense, like in terms of like the value system I see in the transhumanist circle, especially in the U.S. with a very individualistic bent, this is what Project Prometheus kind of is trying to promote, a more species level viewpoint. So Rowan was talking about how when you die, what's going to happen? Well, for me, I live on in the sense of other human beings, right? So what I do for in their betting their life, I could live and die tomorrow. I'll be a happy man if I've accomplished enough to help others. I think we need more of this kind of talk, and if we do, and if we frame all these different technologies, because right now all it is, we have life extension, we have avatars and a whole bunch of other stuff that to many people looks very freaky, and so it makes us look like we're on the fringe of society. But if we frame them all in the context of we want to evolve towards an ideal, and we want to frame it in some kind of spiritual, because a human being always needs some kind of meaning in life. You can't just say don't have any meaning. We're not talking about religion. We're talking about meaning and spirituality. And if you frame it all in that kind of a context and present a holistic vision to society, I think we can be successful in moving forward to a new civilization, a planetary civilization.
I'd like to come in on this as well. And actually,
I want to hear what you thought about that, Gray.
Briefly, recap something that was discussed for a minute or two before we went on air. I think that what Gersh just said is correct, but I think an even stronger argument along the same lines relates to the death of people who die before you do. I think Gersh was mainly talking about people who might die after you do, and how you kind of live on in the sense of your caring about them. The thing about people who die before you do is after they're dead, you're not suffering as a result of their death. Their death is kind of invisible. But what's not invisible is their suffering before they die. If they're aging and they've got, Alzheimer's disease or whatever, then you suffer because they're suffering. And I think this is something that everyone's very familiar with. So I think Rowan has hit the nail on the head with his emphasis that transhumanist thinking is the natural conclusion of a self-interested way of thinking, and therefore maybe reciprocally it's a good way to promote transhumanism is to get people to think more in terms of self-interest. But the thing is, people don't like to think that they think in terms of self-interest. Even if they actually do, they prefer to feel that they are altruistic. And so appealing to people's altruism, even if that altruism isn't completely real, is a good marketing strategy. And to talk about suffering rather than about the death that follows the suffering, and here I am only focusing on life extension, I know, but I accept what Gura said about the other aspects of pioneering technology. That certainly applies as well. But what I'm saying is, talking about the suffering rather than the death that follows the suffering, again, appeals much more to what people are already comfortable with in terms of altruism and what they feel good about, what they think other people will feel good about them about, and so on.
I just don't want to give the wrong impression. I think that the work that Dr. Gray is doing is great. We need it. All I'm saying is that we need some kind of balance, and I just find that there's very little talk amongst transhumanists of this kind of stuff. Like there was an article by Mr. Wesley, some guy, Wesley James or something like that. He's basically writes a lot of articles on against transhumanists. And he was very correct. He said he recently attended a transhumanist conference, and in 10 hours of the conference, there's very little talk about love for fellow human beings and human suffering. I think all I'm saying is that just talking about our personal immortality is not doing any kind of just service to humanity itself. We need to balance that with some talk about the collective good and how all this, what kind of meaning does all this have? Because live long, okay, live long and do it for 1,000 years, and what does it mean? And so I guess I prefer to have a planet that's filled with people living longer, but who are also wiser, who have character traits that have been enhanced, whether through genetics or other means, brain implants. We have a lot of flaws that, while we don't know exactly how to fix them genetically now, but if you think about it, psychopathy, sociopathy, depression, aggression, a lot of these things have a genetic component. And so if you go back to the root of the foundation and building block of all kinds of political and social systems is the unitary human being. So if we go back to square one and simultaneously work on that thing, I'm not saying to stop research on this other stuff. I think we need to balance it and talk more also about meaning and spirituality. I think this will bring more people comfort and will bring transhumanism to the outer community faster. That's just
now,
can I say something first?
Absolutely.
How many people can you help when you're dead? Okay, so the self-interested perspective of trying to preserve your own life is really altruistic, because if you want to help people while you're alive, then that's the way you're going to help people, is to continue staying alive. So I'm a big fan of the first law of the transhumanist wager, which is, look, you can't help anyone if you're dead. So why not preserve your own existence first? Value your own life. Think about the world we're trapped in.
But Rowan, if the police officers who protect you, if they were to think like that, would you feel comfortable? That's the question I pose you. If they were to value their own life and not want to sacrifice themselves to protect others, or they say the soldiers who protect our borders, and if you think like that, if you go back in history, if people thought like that, maybe you wouldn't be even here. In terms of invasions. We need society, on a societal level, we need people who do think altruistically, who do think selflessly. I agree, it's a great thing to live for a long time. Don't get me wrong, trust me, I don't want to die. Nobody wants to die. But what I'm saying is you need to talk about quality of life, not just length of life. And so the meaning of life is not so much in how long you live, but in terms of what you do, how you serve others. And it's in the relationship you have with family and friends. These are what things that give meaning, not just pure length of time. How you live. You can live a long time living in a forest, so I don't know what good would that do to humanity.
Well, I can't recommend anyone to sacrifice their own life for someone else, because it's over for them from their own self-interested perspective. But think about the world we're in, where if we don't end this involuntary death, we're trapped in a system where every 100 years there's a new set of people. There's no real lasting meaning, because the meaning dies with each person. So why not just have a world where we can each live forever?
What I'm saying is, in terms of priorities, that value system should not be number one. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying the collective good should be above that. We shouldn't value our own life at all other expense. I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm not saying not to value your own life.
I would like to suggest that you're both right, because in today's world, when somebody takes an action which puts their own life at risk for some reason, for example, to save a bunch of other lives, then they're not really putting their life at risk in the same sense that they would be in a world that didn't have aging anymore. At the moment, if you're, let's say you're age 30, you know that you've only got a maximum of about 70 more years to live, whatever happens. So what you're doing is you're trading a finite number, let's call it 70, of years of your own life for a finite number of years of other people's lives. And that's a trade-off that doesn't have the problem that Rowan was describing. But when we have the potential to live indefinitely because of having eliminated aging, then the whole logic completely changes. And I think what you say is true. So I think I agree with both of you.
That's actually a great point, Aubrey. And if we can actually just turn it over to Albany, she does have a question. If she can actually pose her question, and if we can just sort of put what we were saying, it seems like we sort of ironed out the major points of what we were discussing, but Albany Rose did have a question. So Albany, what's your question?
Well, balance was brought up quite a lot from Karosh. I hope I said that correctly.
Yes.
And it actually got me thinking about something that Aubrey had talked about, and they kind of collided with overpopulation. I am very much in support of keeping people, giving them healthier lives, and if we are able to live longer, I think that's wonderful. But I am curious about, let's say we can help people live 300 to 500 years long. Now, what happens when very few people die, but more continue to be born? Do you think there will be many negative effects?
I mean, I've answered this question many times before, so let me just give a very brief version of a summary of the answer that I gave. It comes in three parts.
Okay.
The first answer is we probably won't have a problem because people are choosing to have fewer kids all the time. They're also choosing to have those kids later, and they're going to be able to choose to have them a lot later when we don't have menopause anymore. And on top of all that, the carrying capacity of the planet is going to increase as time goes on, as we invent better technology that involves, for example, renewable energy, nuclear fusion, whatever, that allows us to have more people on the planet with less environmental impact. Those three things are all answer number one. Answer number two is, okay, we might get unlucky, that all of that might not happen. We might end up in a situation where we would have to make a choice between a high death rate and a low birth rate. And, okay, the question is that such a hard choice? I mean, today we have kids when we want to, but maybe if we had to actually come to grips with that choice, we would just decide very straightforwardly that the suffering that is associated with aging is enormous and that it's worth a little bit of a sacrifice in terms of having fewer kids than we would like. And the third answer is that even if we don't make that decision, you know, even if we feel, well, it's so absolutely unacceptable to have to restrict the number of kids we have, that would be an even worse imposition than the imposition we suffer under today, namely the imposition of aging. Even if that's how we feel, we still don't have any moral entitlement to hesitate and to not develop these therapies. Because by doing so, by hesitating and not developing the therapies, what we would be doing is denying the future of humanity, our descendants, the choice whether to actually use those therapies. We might, we might just be wrong, either in terms of the problems that will be created or in terms of our kids or our grandkids' views as to the relative, severity of these problems. And if that's true, then our kids and grandkids are not going to be very happy with us for having thought that we knew better and not developed these therapies, and therefore denying them the choice to use these therapies. If, however, we develop these therapies as quickly as possible, then we're giving our descendants the choice whether to use them or not to use them, depending on the circumstances that they find themselves in. And that seems to me to be an absolutely unequivocal moral obligation to get on and do this as soon as possible.
Can I answer and just address that too? If I may. What I want to say also is, in terms of what Dr. DeGray was saying, he raised a great point. Like when we reach a level where lifespans are increasing, and when we reach a level where basically on a global scale we're going to be at a stress point where something has to give. Last time human civilization went through such a period where, when cities were formed, when writing came about, all these religions came about, which is, in the first 1,000 years before Christ. But now I think we're going through a similar kind of an epoch in terms of all these technologies. We're talking about changing the human condition, and changing our genetics, and redefining what it means to be human, living maybe 500 years or more. So it's coming to a point where we have to realize that something is going to give. We have to come up with some kind of value system and some kind of civilization that can accommodate this. And I think, Dr. DeGray is right that new technologies will come about, probably nanotechnology and such, but that will help alleviate some of the resource use. But I think we have to reevaluate the whole political system in the world. So there's a lot of food that's wasted. The issue of capitalism and socialism. Maybe we need to come up with a better system than all this. I think we're going to basically be forced to come up with this. And the epoch we're going through is one of those momentous periods in our humanity's history, similar to when all these religions, Buddhism, Christianity, when they came about. There's been a lot of changes such as this were happening. So in a nutshell, I think there will be both civilizational changes and new political economic systems that have to be created to address the overpopulation and to address this, the resource scarcity issue. You need to come up with a different kind of system. And so basically that's what I want to say.
It's actually some great points right there. Now, I do have a question for Rowan. Rowan, what are your thoughts of how important the 3 laws from the transhumanist wager actually are for the survival of humanity itself?
Well, I'm interested in the survival of, the individual. Well, I think that basically, I don't know if they're that important for the survival of humanity. I'm focused about the survival of the individual, and so I think they're very important for the survival of the individual. That we should protect our own life first.
Well, as I was saying, I think paradoxically, if those laws were implemented on a societal level, individuals will lose their own life faster than any time before. I think on a societal level, if everybody was to adhere to those laws, then more people will have, less security and less security of life and more death. And I think in terms of the direction that human evolution is heading in, if you look at evolution, it goes from less organized to more organized, humanity into city-states, into nations, and pretty soon into a planetary civilization. We're heading more and more into a more collective, joint species level of organization as opposed to more individualism. I think these kind of laws are heading in the wrong direction of history. And humanity yearns for connection and peace. And I don't think these kind of values, so this is actually very important. We need to address these value systems now, because as society changes, people live longer. You will live 300 years. Like Dr. DeGray was saying, what does it mean at that point? If you have to give up your life, if you're going to live to 1,000 years, then you might think twice about it, right? So we need to address these issues. And in this part of Project Prometheus, what we're trying to do is basically we're trying to envision a future world, kind of like Star Trek kind of world, where we say, okay, maybe in 50 years we want that. Let's work backwards and address those issues proactively and come up with solutions now before we have to come with them reactively.
Well, let's just remember that society is made up of individuals. So when we're saying we should love ourselves first and protect our own existence, if everyone did that, I think that'd be a good thing.
Well, I think that there's some side problems on that, though.
But we're not all angels. We have bad people among us, and we need to protect. Some people need to be able to give up their own life to protect us against those bad people, right? That's a very idealistic way of looking at it.
It concerns me that you may find a scenario where people are certainly less willing to risk their life to save others. You know, we have less people who want to be like firemen or policemen because of the sheer risk of the job. I mean, how many times do they go out and risk their lives and don't lose it? I mean, that happens obviously far more often than not. And so it just concerns me that mentality might lead to one of those type of scenarios.
Oh, hopefully we could have robots, do all the dangerous stuff. That's the idea. We could have robots do the dangerous work, and humans could just live forever safely in some sort of paradise. We can have laws and systems of government to protect us, and
well, basically it goes back to my point. Unless you genetically modify humanity, remove all sorts of evil from us, like the aggression instinct, all this kind of stuff, you're always going to be faced with the Hitlers of this world. You're going to be faced with the Saddam Husseins. So if nobody's going to be willing to stand up to evil because they don't want to give up their life because of that first law of transhumanism that Zoltan wrote about in his book, then think about the impact on a societal level. So
these are real issues. I think you're all correct to be worrying about this. And I worry about it too. I certainly don't think these are issues that are so severe that we should be slowing down our efforts to develop these technologies, but there are certainly things to be thinking about. And most of the issues are psychological. I saw a wonderful quote from Brad Templeton just a couple of days ago. So Brad, I don't know if all of you know that name. He has a very distinguished history in pioneering technology over the years, and his current main work is on self-driving cars. And one thing he said a couple of days ago in relation to the marketing of self-driving cars and the bringing the advancement into general use is that there's a big barrier, which is that self-driving cars don't need to be just safer than people. They need to be vastly safer than people, simply because people are used to the current way of doing things. The way he put it very pithily was that people don't want to be killed by robots. They want to be killed by drunk drivers. And I think that's probably more generally applicable across the whole of what we're talking about tonight.
That seems to be an overlapping theme from lots of ideas, though. People would rather be killed by a sword than magic, or, the thing they can see. Well, I certainly think that the transhumanist laws there that Zoltan wrote about are interesting, but like you guys, there's some things about them that I immediately jump out as questionable to me. Not in what they say, but what they might end up implying.
One thing I forgot to mention. I forgot to mention about the transhumanist laws. Okay, let's not forget that the third law is, protect the universe. Okay, safeguard the existence of the universe. So that's an altruistic thing, because if each person cared about safeguarding the existence of the universe, that's gonna help
Except his laws say as long as it does not contradict first law, which is protect your own life, right? So protect your own life always first.
Yeah.
So it goes back.
And if protecting your life, means you got to dump some toxic waste in the river.
Hey, I gotta say, protecting your own life, I have to say that is the most important thing in the world. I mean, let's just face it. That's just true. If without your life, you have nothing. Without your existence, you have nothing. You're a non-existent person. Okay, all each of us have is our life, our existence.
But we each compete with the rest of humanity. What I'm saying is death is not the end of all, right? We need to think of humanity as one family, as one. We're all one being, basically, right? And I believe evolutionarily, we're heading that way. There will come a point where, through brain implants, we're all going to be connected as one hive mind. Maybe not in 10 years, maybe not in 50 years, but eventually that's the way evolution is heading in. And so I'm saying these laws and these kind of value systems that the law of transhumanists have go in the face of history, the direction that history is heading in, which is more unification as opposed to separation.
just hypothetical that we're going to be one hive mind. I mean, we're individuals. That's just the nature of reality, is that we're individuals. So we need to protect our individual existence.
Well, let's actually toss the conversation over to Albany, and then we'll go into closing thoughts tonight, because we are ending a little early tonight. So, Albany, what's the last question you got on the panel tonight?
If it's my last question, I actually would love to ask all of you, what are some of the more severe backlashes you have gotten from people and their responses to what you believe and what you stand for and what you work for? Whether it was from maybe someone who is overly religious or just thought it was immoral to live longer. I'm just curious about what you all might face. I guess I'll start with Aubrey.
Aubrey, what's your...
Hi, I'm in. Yeah, sorry, I was muted for a second. Yeah, I've been remarkably heartened by how few really negative incidents I've ever really had. I find that the opposition that I get is usually rather more, I guess, more pompous than emotional. You know, people will make some obvious kind of criticism like, oh dear, you know, there's going to be too many people, or dictators are going to live forever, or they'll make some comment about the feasibility, saying, you know, this can't be done because it never has been done, things like that. But all of these things will come from a position of, if you like, superiority, trying to pretend that, you know, a kind of assumption that they're the first person who ever thought of this objection. So it's kind of, it's almost laughable. It's certainly never really angry. You know, people occasionally have been saying that I ought to worry about being the, you know, if you like, the spiritual leader of this movement. I'm going to, you know, be attracting lunatics who want to kill me and so on. But I certainly don't see it at the moment, which is quite heartening, really. Maybe it just goes to show that I've been right all of this time, that people who are opposing this are really just conflicted and not really very sure of what they think.
If I may, the two categories of basically people in opposition that I normally find. One is the whole argument about playing God and what it really means to be human. So the disagreement lies, like, if you start modifying our genes and doing all this kind of stuff, are we really still human? So this is a question, and I believe so. I believe we need to widen our definition of what it is to be a human being. And but that's one of the main, people are fine with, you know, contact lenses, anything on the exterior surface, but once you go into the interior of our bodies, then people just get all riled up and they think, you know, we're playing God and that sort of stuff. So it's one of the major sources of opposition. But I think, again, if one of the reasons is because they view there's a commonly held view that transhumanists, they have a God complex, and they're very egotistical. It's all about me, as opposed to, the humanity as a whole, as I was saying. So if we are successful in convincing them that we're not like that, we're not like selfish, we have the best interest of humanity at heart, and we're doing this because we believe that, we want to prevent catastrophic extinction for humanity, and you have, you're lovers of humanity and not opposed to it, and we're not here to, remove humanity and create something new. I think if you put it in that kind of context, people will have more comfort. And it goes back to what I was saying, is in terms of having a proper spiritual value system attached to all this and putting everything in context. And then people will not be, have their backs up against the wall and will trust us more.
I just want to say it's a fantastic comment there, Cyrus.
Okay, I'll go. So basically, my biggest opposition is from, religious people who basically, think I'm leading people into the pits of hell, because I'm basically saying we can save ourselves with technology, possibly, and, I'm basically putting a lot of doubt on the idea of God and afterlife. I get a big opposition from people in the death positive movement who think that, I'm putting fear and stress into people, by saying that death is such a bad thing, it's such a serious thing, and they just want to say, well, death is fine, we should just accept it. And these people are in a a pro-death trance, right? Like Aubrey, he talks about the pro-aging trance. Well, there's a pro-death trance. It's a death-positive movement who are so accepting of the idea of death, they can't get it out of their psyche. It's like a part of their reality. They can't understand the possibility that we can actually live forever. And those are my two biggest opponents, you could say.
Well, with that being said, let's actually break into the final thoughts tonight and go from there. Aubrey de Grey, what are your overall consensus of transhumanism and what you've heard tonight?
Well, let me actually focus on what I've heard tonight, because it's actually been very stimulating to me. I think that a lot of the remarks that my colleagues on this panel have made have been extremely thoughtful and well thought through, and they make sense. I've been giving comments that perhaps sound kind of, anti-transhumanist in a way, because I'm saying, well, transhumanism is, perhaps a word that does harm. But of course, I'm talking here from a marketing perspective, and inevitably, I'm talking from my own marketing perspective, from where I'm sitting in terms of my position in a particular aspect of visionary technology. So I don't want to in any way belittle what other people have said here in terms of the value of other ways of thinking and the value of trying to raise humanity's sights and so on. I think that there's been a lot of very sensible things said, and I'm privileged to have been on this panel. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you, Dr. Aubrey de Grey. Let's go over to Cyrus. Cyrus, final thoughts on what you've heard tonight, and just what do you want to leave the audience with in your closing statement?
Same thing I want to say. It's been an honor being on this panel with everybody. Everybody has been very stimulating for me, and once again, Dr. de Grey, it's been an honor to have you here. I just want to basically reiterate to my fellow transhumanists that maybe it's time that we have some soul searching to do about what we want to represent to the rest of humanity, about who we are. And if we really want this movement to be successful, as opposed to being viewed as freaks and being a fringe element, we need to think and bring the rest of humanity into it, bring them into a comfort zone, that we do have their best interests at heart, that we're not all about us, we're also about them. And talk more about love, talk more about humanity, talk more about human suffering, and not just, I just want to live for 1,000 years. I think that's the wrong message to give. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I'm saying that just widen the conversation and bring the rest of humanity into this conversation and think of them too.
Well, thank you for that, Cyrus. Rowan, do you have any closing thoughts on what you've heard tonight and what you want to leave the audience with?
I would just leave everyone with the idea that trying to live forever yourself, pursuing your eternal life, is the most loving thing you can do. Because you can't help anyone if you're dead. And so if you want to, you have to love yourself first. And then that's when you're pursuing your eternal life, you're naturally gonna want to help other people. It comes naturally. The more you value your own existence, you're gonna value the existence of other people, because it comes back around to you. And the second thing I just want to leave the audience with is give your money to Sense Foundation, because seriously, because we're in a lot of trouble. We're in a lot of trouble. If atheism is true, dang, I mean, we're gonna die. The world sucks because aging is killing us all. So we have to support Sense Foundation. And to be an activist for Sense Foundation. Go do what I'm doing. Just start your own fan club to promote Sense Foundation. As many people as can do this as possible, it's going to help our chances of living forever. And I think there's no more important goal in life than to live forever. Because if you die, you have lost all your meaning. There's nothing. Life was meaningless. Life was pointless, and sucks for you. So give your money to Sense Foundation.
And that
that actually being said, Foxhole, Albany, you guys got anything to add?
I learned something new, so I'm happy. No,
I
that
actually
was,
learned. Go ahead, Albany.
I just wanted to personally thank all three of you for this because it really was very insightful, and it's encouraged me to look much deeper into this issue, which honestly I never really thought of past a couple weeks ago. So, thank you.
I'm actually my prize thing with this show was meeting someone that has a more epic beard than the Foxhole Atheist. Aubrey DeGray, you made my dreams come true. That's all I'm going to say.
That is a mighty beard.
So, Randy, do you have a question for Aubrey in closing?
A question. I could sit here and think of 100 questions.
Something about his beard? There was an ongoing joke during the week?
Well, mostly I just wanted to say that this really has been just a treat and educational from a lot of aspects. There are, personally, I wouldn't identify as a transhumanist, and I've only recently come into that term and this community, but I'm familiar with a lot of the ideas behind it, and so for me it's been just a real honor to get to meet over this course of this series we've done some of the influential people behind the transhumanist movement or transhumanist ideas in general. And so thank you all for being here, really.
In that, thank you to all my guests for being here. Thank you, as always, to my beautiful, beautiful co-host, Ann Randy. With that actually being said, though, remember, the Age of Reason is upon us, so prepare